Well, Razorback fans, we know football's in full swing. Basketball will be here, but there's still plenty of baseball to talk about, and we're going to do that here on today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the bombastic edition. I'm John Neighbors alongside Andrew Ellis. And Andrew, it was fun talking about baseball last week. Got some more topics to jump into. And again, I know football mainly. Basketball is there too, but baseball, fall ball, and all that stuff will be here before we know it. And I know today, as I think in baseball, just in general for Arkansas, who's the starting rotation? That's going to be a question that gets asked all the time, each and every year. And Arkansas, they're going to have some options this season.
Yeah, John, it's funny. It's always a good day when you can talk baseball, and that's what we're here to do. And yeah, like you said, we understand football is going on. We understand basketball is going on, but baseball is year-round as well. And we're trying to prepare you guys so that you don't have to ask us these questions in January. You don't have to ask us these questions in February. We're getting you prepped up and everything. But, John, I just have to when I was preparing for the show, I was just thinking about all the times that DVH has gotten himself in trouble by saying, oh, this is going to be the best lineup ever. We're gonna hit the cover off the ball this year, or oh, this is gonna be the best pitching staff ever. And I know fans are really obsessed with keeping him and people like us accountable when we throw out claims like this. And it's just kind of funny because I feel like last year going into the offseason, one of the things we kept saying is this might be the best pitching staff we've ever seen under Dave Van Horn, maybe at the University of Arkansas ever, or at least in our very young lifetimes. But John, I got to be honest, man. I really think there's a chance this year's pitching staff, you can make an argument top to bottom is every bit as good. And I know as soon as I say that, some fans are going to say, yeah, well, I mean, you guys say this every year and it can't really. Frankly, I don't feel that bad about saying last year's pitching staff was the best Arkansas pitching staff we've ever seen. The numbers kind of not fully, putting into the conversation, but as you can see, they stacked up pretty well. And I think we all said Hagen Smith was maybe the best Arkansas pitcher we had ever seen. I think he kind of lived up to that billing. So, no, I don't feel too bad about saying that. And, John, I definitely don't think that Arkansas is going to have a pitcher, any one player on this team, as good as Hagen Smith. We might not see a player as good as Hagen Smith come through Arkansas for a long time. But I really think if you just go through the roster top to bottom and make the, comparisons between each guys and the depth of the group, I think you could make an argument that it might be a better overall group. And I want to start with the starting rotation because, like I said, you're not going to have a Hagen Smith where on Friday night you have one starter who's clearly better than the others. But if people remember, there were a lot of weekends throughout the year where we knew Hagen was going game one, but then it was like, oh, Tigert's kind of had his ups and downs. Maybe he's banged up. Oh, Molina, he hurt his foot, and we were kind of worried what's going on with him. He wasn't as consistent as they want to be. And I really feel like Arkansas has got a chance to have a more well-rounded rotation. And I think for me, the big question starts with who's going to be the third guy. And I say third guy, assuming there's two already in place. I'm going to assume the two transfers Arkansas brought in Zach Root and Landon Bedelshis. I still don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. It's spelled weird. I'm going Bedelshis until someone tells me otherwise. But I think those two guys are kind of semi-locks to be in the starting rotation. They were starters their last school. Root's one of the top prospects left-handed in his class. Bedelshis threw 84 innings last year. Like, that's legitimate experience throwing out there on the weekend. And so I would assume that both those guys didn't come here to play school. They didn't come here to come out of the bullpen. I would assume they're going to be starting. So a guy that we, you and I obviously know personally because, he helped launch the Bombastic podcast, Gabe Gackle, is one that we've all kind of assumed is going to ascend and be that next ace in the future and next weekend starter. And I think it's a pretty safe. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I think Arkansas has a couple of options. Gage Wood, obviously, is a guy who started games last year, has had his moments in his career, made a lot of pro, I thought, and I thought he finished the year fairly strong. I guess technically he was the final starter of the year because he's at SEMO game, but he had a really nice summer in the Cape Cod League as a starting pitcher. Had a 1.42 ERA, struck out 29 guys in 19 innings. Is he able to build on that next step? Frontline potential rotation guy. I know some fans in the Arkansas fan base really, it's kind of opinions vary. Some think he should be the ace. Some think he should be middle relief on the mid. Excited to see what he kind of does this offseason if he can jump into that mix a little bit. Another guy, Ben Bybee. I feel like he's one that gets overlooked a lot. I mean, he started a lot of games at Arkansas. His numbers don't jump off the page at you at all. I mean, he had a 5.83 ERA, but he pitched really well in that Kansas State game in the postseason last year. I thought he made a lot of progress from year one to year two. Does he take that next step and join that mix? I think Gackle's probably the safer option. I mean, a guy that had a 2.32 ERA as a true freshman at Arkansas, struck out 57 guys in 42 innings. I think he's as talented as any pitcher on the roster, maybe even any pitcher in the country. And so we'll see how it shakes out. But overall, I feel like Arkansas has a lot of high floor options and guys with high ceilings as well when you're talking about Gabe Gackle. How does it compare to last year's group? Last year, we all thought that Brady Tigert was going to be awesome and Mason Molina was going to be awesome. Didn't necessarily work out that way. So I really do think, trying to avoid hyperbole here, I think Arkansas has a decent chance to have a more well-rounded starting rotation, even if they're not going to have a guy as talented as Hagen Smith going out there every Friday night.
Yeah, because Arkansas almost got spoiled where if you think about, like, of course, Hagen Smith, and I know the year before that, like, he was hurt all year and he didn't get to see it, but like Jackson Wiggins was going to be a great starter. And then before that, Connor Nolan was pretty dadgum good. And even though maybe your starters weren't as good, but then you had Kevin Kopps before that, it was just, Arkansas's had, maybe not the on the field postseason success the fans want, but pitching wise, at least in the starters, they've had a pretty good run at it. And I'm sure that everyone's going to be totally fine and they're not going to complain about the starting rotation this year and not say somebody else needs to be playing, I'm sure. So, totally. It's going to be great, though. It's going to be fascinating to see. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the group of returners that are going to be in the bullpen next season for the Razorbacks, or this upcoming season for the Razorbacks, here in just a second. So stay with us. All right, folks, here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the Bombastic Edition, I want to remind everybody that we're brought to you by FanDuel. We all love sports, and we love them so much that we never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and all the sports start sporting like we want them to. But with FanDuel, it lets us keep going whenever we want. All we have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime we're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. It's FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so continuing on with the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the Bombastic Edition. We talked a little bit about the weekend rotations, Andrew, and now, I mean, the group of returners, it's funny because you feel like, at least how I look at it, you lost a lot last year. I mean, from this season. A lot of really key players, whether it's Hagen Smith, but you think about Peyton Stovall and losing him, and a lot of the other guys that were so good for Arkansas and were able to, make a lot of that season in the regular season, at least a success. But it is a Dave Van Horn baseball team after all, and Arkansas is not a team that necessarily has to rebuild. They usually just reload.
Yeah, and you mentioned how Arkansas always has like that frontline guy you can go into the season knowing, all right, hey, this is a guy, and I know Gabe Gackle's a sophomore, but we kind of view him in that regard, and certainly there's no shortage of options on this team, but I think a lot of that's obviously by design. They do a really good job of not just having the junior like Hagen Smith who's going to get drafted and not just having the freshman sensation. They usually have a good little mix of some transfer guys, some older guys who you've seen on the mound do it before, and some up-and-coming young talent in the freshman and sophomore class. And when I look at this Arkansas pitching staff top to bottom, and part of why I really think it has a chance to be every bit, if not better, every bit as good, if not better than last year's group, is because they have that mix of skill sets. And it's not just a bunch of seniors. It's not just a bunch of freshmen. You just go on through. Gage Wood and Ben Bybee are two guys that I mentioned that are kind of in that rising junior class. And I think that class is going to be what makes or breaks how good this pitching staff is going to be. Joining them in the junior class, you've got a guy in Christian Fouch who we don't talk about it a ton. Christian Fouch had a sub-1 ERA. He threw 22 innings, and so Arkansas was very good about how they used him. It was usually 1, maybe 2 innings here at a time, but they used him well. He took a massive leap from freshman to sophomore year. He's throwing 100. I'd imagine he's going to be another guy that potentially is closing games for Arkansas, maybe a setup guy, but you feel pretty good about what he's going to bring to the table and the kind of strides he's making early in his career. They've got a couple other guys in that junior class, and Cooper Dossett and Parker Coyle, both of which we've seen on the mound at Arkansas and had varying levels of success. One left-handed, one right-handed. Those two names might not necessarily jump out and surprise Arkansas. It's like, oh yeah, like those guys are awesome. But we've seen them make some strides in their career. Parker Coyle's thrown like 50, 60 innings in his Arkansas career at this point. Cooper Dawson, I feel like, could be the Jake Faraday of next year in a weird way, as a guy who only threw like 2/3 of an inning as a true freshman. Talented guy. We all know that the stuff's there, but he didn't throw a ton as a true freshman. Got on the mound a little bit more, threw 15 innings last year, and had pretty good numbers for the most part. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he took that next little step and was a legitimate bullpen weapon for Arkansas. But you've also got two guys in fifth year, 6 year seniors, Will McIntyre, Dylan Carter. Again, Hog fans can have their opinions on how much each of those guys bring to the table. Will McIntyre has thrown 197.2 innings in his Arkansas career. 200 innings, man. Like, that doesn't even seem like a real number. He's got 204 career strikeouts. He's appeared in 65 games in his Arkansas career. Again, I know he's a little bit of a polarizing figure for whatever reason. Fans like to share their opinions a lot. You got 65 games worth of experience. I think we can find a spot for you, brother. I think we can find a role for you. So what does that role end up being? I mean, he's started games in his career. He's closed games in his career. He's done everything in between. Wouldn't surprise me to see him in just about any role. And I feel like he's a guy you can give the ball to with confidence just about any time. And Dylan Carter, same thing. I know he was coming off of an injury last year, which he kind of made his way back from that injury faster than anybody expected to. Didn't go great for him in his time on the mound, but he had a really solid year the year before he went down with the injury. He's got 48 innings worth of experience. His stuff was a little bit better. He was throwing 95, 96 in his time that we saw him last year. I'm looking at both of those guys as seniors, and I'm thinking they can kind of fill any holes that might be left over with some of these guys that I talked about earlier. And then I go on down to the younger group, and this is what really excites me about this group. So last year, Arkansas had the number one recruiting class in the country coming in with their freshmen. And a lot of that was due to the pitching staff. Obviously, a guy like Nolan Souza and Ryder Helfrich are talented, but a lot of it came down to pitchers like a Gabe Gacko, who we talked about earlier. But Hunter Dietz is one that I feel like is often forgotten about. He was actually ranked a little bit higher than Gacko going into their freshman years as one of the top freshman arms in the country, obviously as a left-hander. He only threw in a couple innings in his Arkansas career, was banged up early, and then he had some soreness afterwards. He had a little bit of a minor procedure in the offseason. But again, this is a guy that they viewed as a potential weekend starter when he got to campus, and he's a guy who turned down a lot of money to go to Arkansas. So you feel pretty good about his chances to help. Remember Colin Fisher, a name that for a while it seemed like, hey, this is going to be the midweek starter. I believe he even started the first weekend of the season when Arkansas played a 4-game series against James Madison. Had a lot of really promising moments as a freshman. He was even on a freshman All-American list, I believe, from D1 baseball. Had a sub-3 ERA as a true freshman, got some valuable experience. He should be back and ready to roll. I'm also looking at a guy in Tate McGuire, who, a name that many Razorback fans probably don't know, only threw 1 or 2 innings last year. He was one of the more talented guys in that same class as well. Had a really good summer in the Cape Cod League. I also want to go ahead and throw Josh Heineman in this group because he'll be a redshirt sophomore next year. He's coming off a Tommy John surgery. But I think in that group there with those 4 redshirt freshmen, second-year guys, you've got a chance for any of those guys to kind of step into that next step and really be contributors. And, I've just listed off like 12, 14 names here. Obviously, every single weekend, you're not going to be able to pitch every single one of these guys. But you just look around, and Arkansas has options to just about any question you want to ask about this pitching staff. I've gone all this whole time. I have not even mentioned the true freshman class coming in this year, which features, you mentioned Jackson Wiggins, his little brother Carson Wiggins is going to be on campus, which is a nice little surprise for Arkansas. He's also joined by Cole Gibbler, one of the top left-handers in his class. And so, again, you mentioned rebuilding and reloading. That's kind of what Arkansas does, and it seems like they have a nice little hierarchy of your older guys, some seniors that have been there, done that, some juniors that might get drafted, some highly talented, one of the best sophomore classes in the country, and one of the best freshman classes in the country. I know that everyone's going to have their questions and concerns going into the year, but for me, John, I'm just looking at this group and I'm like, I don't see a way in which they're not at least good. Will they be the best in the country? Will they, set records and break the strikeout records or all that? Who knows? We'll see. But I just look at this group and I'm like, man, they have answers to just about every question. I feel pretty good about the group overall.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you have Matt Hobbs, which I guess he won the award. I think it's D1 baseball, coach of the year, assistant coach of the year, whatever it is. It's like, you still have him on staff. And I know people feel a certain way about the other coach that's on staff, but Matt Hobbs is a proven dude. And, so many players under him already have been phenomenal. And it just seems like he gets the benefit of the doubt where the names that you're hearing are maybe guys you haven't heard of, or maybe they're guys that you saw last year or whatever that you didn't really care for or didn't stand out to you. But that's one thing that I think Hagen Smith is definitely a great example of development. And, Hagen was great as a freshman, but there's no doubt that each year he got better. And, if you could do that with even 75% of all the players year over year, you're going to constantly just be churning out not only really great pitching performances, but also NFL draft prospects, which at the end of the day is what all these players want.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot that they only went out and got 3 pitchers in the transfer portal. I mentioned the 2 top transfers. They also brought in Aiden Jimenez from Oregon State, who might or might not be able to help them. But I think that tells you that they feel pretty good about the talent they have on the roster and their ability to develop these high-level arms and turn them into monsters, which we've kind of seen them do with Christian Fauch. I mean, a lot of these guys I've just listed off here, if you think about them as true freshmen, they probably didn't excite you a ton. But all of a sudden now you see them as sophomores, juniors. They're starting to make those strides. And so I'm confident in this coaching staff. And there's a lot of talent. I mean, we're asking Matt Hobbs a lot. We're asking him to turn these guys that throw 97 into good pitchers. He's done a good job doing that. And I think he's going to continue to do that at Arkansas.
Yeah, it's almost like he's like the Bobby Petrino of this team, where it's just like you got to save it, you got to help. If you're not good at your job, or if you don't do a good job this year, then we're kind of screwed. Because
future Arkansas head coach Matt Hobbs,
we'll see. We'll see
how it works out. But I tell you what, he's done such a good job that I feel like he's now entered that conversation with how well he's done. Obviously, I'm joking a little bit in terms of, is he going to be the future head coach? We'll see. But I think he's put himself in that position because of how well he's done with this group and developing this pitching staff at Arkansas.
And don't forget too, a guy like Wes Johnson, who was at Arkansas for a few seasons. I know he went to the pros for a bit, had one season at LSU. Yes, he had Paul Skeens won a title and all that, but
good year.
Yeah, not bad. But point is that he's a guy that was a pitching coach and solidified himself under Dave Van Horn, and now is a head coach over at Georgia and has done a phenomenal job in 1 year. I see Matt Hobbs doing that no matter where he ends up going. So who knows? Who knows what's in store for him?
But think about it, John. I mean, when Matt Hobbs got hired for to replace Wes Johnson, I think a lot of fans kind of were like, oh, are we sure this guy's going to be able to live up to the standard that Wes Johnson has set at Arkansas? And he's done that. And I think even raised the bar a little bit. I mean, obviously Wes Johnson gets a lot of credit for doing that, but Arkansas pitching staff, I mean, it's hard to find a pitching coach who's done better over the last 5 years than Matt Hobbs. Yeah.
And I think I remember too, when Dave Van Horn was asked whenever Wes Johnson was hired at LSU, Dave just made sure that everyone knew. He's like, well, they actually contacted us about our guy first, kind of saying like they wanted Matt Hobbs first, but they settled for Wes Johnson and everything. So yeah, but he's done a great job. And I mean, listen, you can always count on him to have a good pitching staff out there. And I guess we'll see once the season gets going. But appreciate everybody listening and watching into the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the Bombastic Edition. For Andrew Ellis, I'm John Neighbors. Same sports show, same sports channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. We'll see you then.